Hi, everyone. All right. Oh, I'm so excited for today. Well, we might have two guests because we might see Roger popping on in here. But most importantly, I am so excited for you guys. Well, for me to get to hang with one of my great friends and an incredible colleague. There's no better time. Look, every month, every day should be Earth Day, Earth Month. We got to be thinking about climate and our choices and the impact on the environment and all of this stuff. And we're going to unpack it with Kate Geagan, who has really, especially as a dietitian, been ahead of the curve on this for so long. And I thought actually, Kate, it would be fun to have you, because I always love hearing about it, have you share how you kind of got into the whole green thing, like way before. Certainly a lot of practitioners were looking at green and as it related to health, but also just in the overall in the book space and all of those pieces. And then we'll also have you share a little bit about an organization. I put the foodandplanet.org info. You guys will see it, right there. So that's also something that we want to have you check out. So Kate, let's kick it off with a little intro about you and how you got green.
Oh my gosh. Ashley, this is such an honor and pleasure to be with you. I just love you so much and your
Ditto.
community. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah, I started, the real intersection aha moment, I'll be very honest. It came on a playground in the form of a Smucker's Uncrustable. And I had two children under age 3, and I was on the playground with a bunch of moms. And after, the kids were all playing, everyone pulled out snacks, and one of the moms pulled out a Smucker's Uncrustable. And my immediate thought was, how many resources went into creating that snack, from like the packaging to the fact it was frozen to the fact it was stamped. And I wasn't faulting the mom at all. She was just looking for an easy solution. It was more that it was a moment for me of like, our food system is broken, that we're outsourcing PB&Js now. Like, aren't those supposed to be the easiest thing for moms to feel good about or caregivers to feel good about? And just a tiny bit of context, I was living in Park City, Utah at the time, and this was 2007. And all of the mayors across the Intermountain West were getting together because if you looked at the climate models of 2030, which at the time felt really far away, and now we're 8 years away, there would be no snow below 10,000 feet in the winter in the Intermountain West. And I am a lifelong skier. I love skiing. You know that about me. And I basically saw the Smucker's Uncrustable. I thought in my mind, the mayors of the West are getting together in our community tonight to talk about how to save our snow. I wonder if there's any connection. And that was just the lightning rod that I went home, I did some research and realized the American diet is the SUV of eating styles. And what an opportunity for intersection of healthier choices for people as well as planet outcomes and snowpack and all that. So I quickly went home, had 2 kids under 3, wrote a book proposal during nap time and nighttime. That was crazy. I don't recommend doing that. And got a Rodale, got behind the idea, which was amazing. And then Go Green, Get Lean came out in 2009. So like you, I mean, you and I have been in this space for a long time. And I imagine many of your audience has too, like just being really pioneering in that way of seeing these connections. But it's a super exciting time now because I feel like culturally, the business community, the world community, consumers have really caught up and latched onto this idea, and now it's just exploding, and so it's super exciting.
It is exploding and it is so exciting. It also is, there's frustration, and there's frustration for us. And I was just in DC actually yesterday. I had to think, where am I, what day? And the host that I was talking to before we were on air, she's a young mom, and she was saying how she really struggles to know what are the right choices from a planet friendly standpoint. I was like, yeah, so there's so much greenwashing, there's so much marketing, selling of this is better for you. And And then a lot of times we just feel like, wait, but is it really, in terms of, within that part. So from a high level, let's talk about, I mean, you and I both, you mentioned Rodale as the publisher, but we've both been to the Rodale Institute. We've brought practitioners there and we've looked at the soil, and you can see what soil looks like when it's grown organic, certainly when it's grown regeneratively or farmed regeneratively, versus what soil looks like when a lot of herbicides have been applied, and you see the mineral loss and just, it's silty, not like, packed packed in terms of soil. So how do we help, and how are you helping practitioners communicate what is actually planet friendly from a nutrition standpoint? Because we got to make this easier, I think is where I'm getting to. It just feels overwhelming. Yeah.
100%. And you and I, we've both been dietitians for a while, and my whole take on like the noise and all the chatter, we've always had that in our profession. When I first was starting, it was about low fat and fat free, then it was gluten free. And so we're always battling trends and people trying to jump on bandwagons. And as long as we can really ground ourselves in what is the science saying and where am I getting my information from? Where are there points of consensus and alignment? And so thank you for putting the Food and Planet link there, because this might be really helpful for practitioners who have the exact question you asked. We had the same question at Food and Planet, and last fall we published a scoping review to basically look, we did an assessment. It wasn't a full systematic review that our PhD said, oh yes, he's like, well, we didn't really check 10,000 reports. But what we did is we looked at the 90 food-based dietary guidelines that exist across the world, the 90 countries that have them. And we said, of the 13 of those that include sustainability in their mission, what are the points of alignment? So we actually had 20 indicators around sustainability to see how frequently they showed up across these different food-based dietary guidelines. And it turns out they're remarkably consistent, Ashley, which to me is great, because yes, there's some things we're still working out, there's gray areas, but the big broad brushstrokes are pretty consistent across food-based dietary guidelines. As well, our next step was to sample 10 global synthesis reports. IPCC, World Wildlife Fund, World Resource Institute, the WHO, to really try to see, is there a lot of confusion, or do we have some orienting principles? And we do. And the number one orienting principle is to eat less ultra-processed food. That's the number one tip across all of them, followed closely by less meat, specifically less processed meat, but then less meat. That's the top bucket across all of them. So I think that's a very helpful orienting principle for anyone listening. And it brings some interesting questions, right, about all of these like meat substitutes and meat swaps that are being sold right now. And I happen to have my own opinions on those, but I hope we can dive into that too.
Yeah. Well, we can dive right in, because that I am so happy as somebody who started her career selling super processed sugared cereals. I'm so happy that ultra processed is rising to the top, even above meat. And because like I had a conversation with someone, at certain points you're just like, I'm going to stop. And it was a whole conversation about water usage. And it related to water for the usage for almonds and for oat in farming, how much water. And it was, and you're probably not going to believe this, but maybe you will. It was actually an argument to why you want to actually have cheese from cows. And they were going through, like, it was just how they circled around on that whole part. And I was like, you know what? I don't really need to win a water war here. I mean, I think we have parts of the country, parts of the world where water is just, it is an inaccessible resource, and we're damaging, so much of that water. But let's just stop that discussion. And can we agree that a whole almond, a whole oat, if we're having it, and a whole cow's milk cheese, whatever cheddar, whatever you want to have, is still going to be better than the pieces and the parts? And what's interesting to me is that that's rising to the top from a planet-friendly space. So that's really powerful. So tell me a little bit more about that, and feel free to jump in on your processed planet foods, the processed plant base. That's a tongue twister on that part, because I'm right there with you in terms of that.
Yeah. So I think you really bring up a good point, and it's just as for the practitioners listening, if you had a patient or a client walk into your office, you don't instantly layer everything you know about every step they can be taking to optimize their health and nutrition outcomes and well-being. You start with big, you layer, you go for low-hanging fruit, maybe there's some nuance, and then maybe you have a budget of things that aren't ideal, but it lets you thrive and flourish in your lifestyle, and you've made all these great gains. And I personally would advocate the same approach for sustainability, right? Like, we know from the research, this is one thing we've seen time and time again since this space has started. When you look at what motivates people, actually doing it just for the sake of the planet is the least powerful, compelling motivator. So you have to find those entry points, those stories, those points of alignment with other goals. And that's what you lean into versus like, hey, don't eat almonds because there's a water shortage, 6 states away.
Right.
And we have enough, I think, existential angst in this moment, this planet, that's personally not helping. And it can throw false confusions around, to your point of like, if you're really focusing only on almonds versus oats, like you're already, that might be, your time might be better spent focusing on regenerative ag principles and filling your shopping cart with more things done from a regenerative ag standpoint, because the water storing capacity of that soil is so much better. So the water issue is only an issue because right now we're wasting so much of it. Understanding Ag just launched their Regenified seal at Expo West. It's not yet public facing for consumers, but for practitioners, be watching for this. But there are significant gains in nutrient composition, water storage capacity, soil microbiome to certified regenerative ag principles. So that's the first thing. I hope I answered your question. And then second, and we can just get into it, is my own thinking of, as I've watched this plant-based meat space evolve, is there's a lot of false flags. It's new investment dollars under the guise of saving the planet, but it's processed food 2.0, and it's frankly patenting nature, which I do not agree with. I think if all these burgers were beans, lentils, mushrooms, regenerative ancient grains, wonderful. But there's an IP play happening that is driving the valuation. And these are expensive foods. These are not accessible everyday swaps the way when we eat lower on the food chain and don't have patents involved. So I actually think there's a lot of confusion that these are somehow a solution. And I'm more cautious. I'm more cautious on health benefits. These are very processed foods, and at scale, we do not know at scale, because a lot of this is still proprietary information, what the true carbon impact, water footprint, unintended consequences will be.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And it is, from an access standpoint, it's making me more and more frustrated, because we see some of the big, that I won't name them, but some of the big, fast food, especially here in Columbus, Ohio, you can now go to like a White Castle, or, I will name them, in some of these places. And it's like, oh, you can get the such and such burger that's there. And when we look at the people that are eating there, they tend to consume a less nutrient dense diet anyway. And when you read the labels for a lot of these, they're much more much less nutrient dense as well. So the idea of reduction of meat in favor of pieces and parts of plants and a lot of binders and these other things does not make sense to me. Now, if you are somebody who does not want to have a burger, I am all for that. And you're like, okay, when I want to have a burger, there's this meat replacement one, and I'm going to have that. I'm just really impressed by the companies that are taking it the next step forward and actually designing these from whole food ingredients, as you've been talking about. I think that, to me, is, it's the same thing that we see in like the potato chip aisle, or we see, wherever it is on that part. I was looking for a non-dairy cheese that I would feel comfortable, and I love Miyoko's. Let me be clear. I love everything that they do. Like, I will eat things just to eat Miyoko's butter, because it's just, and you read the ingredient label and you're like, it's just great. It's like cashews, here you go, like whatever. but I couldn't find a cheese that if you had, instead of telling me it was a cheese, if you had gone over to the protein bar section, it would have been everything that we would have said do not consume, or not better for you consistently, as you know, as a normal part of your diet. So I think I'm with you. I think that the hyper processing. So top point to take away. So if you're just joining us here with Kate Geagan, talking about Planet Friendly. She's got amazing resources specifically for practitioners at foodandplanet.org/downloads. And you'll see that in the comments and also here. And if you're a practitioner interested in this space, you want to connect with Kate, because they're doing really cool things in terms of developing research, in terms of developing tools for practitioners. You all know how I love to have tools that we can use, in this conversation. And so the top point from what you were looking at from a research standpoint was really the reduction in ultra processed foods. And then we got into processed meats. So meats was this whole area, and the top of the line there was ultra processed meats on that part. To me, I feel like that's important, because based on where someone lives, access to better quality meat may really be a challenge. And so I don't think it's really fair to say things like grass-fed and grass-finished are much better, like if we're saying that and somebody doesn't have access to it, we're creating, a problem within that part. So when we're thinking about how to communicate from a more accessible way, when you're talking about meat, is it just the sheer quantity, and then also, as you mentioned, the processed piece that really rises to the top in terms of better for the planet?
Yeah, the first part is definitely about how much.
How much?
In fact, I am part this week, David Katz, True Health Initiative. We're launching the #NoBeef Week, and it is just to raise awareness of what's happening in the Amazon right now, with Brazil doing massive exports of beef. And again, it's more us as consumers, if we choose. I'm not trying to tell anyone in Brazil how to use their land or how not to use their land. But if our dollars are sending a message that we think this is a great product, that's going to be harder then to sort of change how they think about that resource and asset. So the amount is the number one thing, right? To your point. And actually, there's a cost savings there as well, which can increase accessibility, because when we shift our protein from, beef, if we do a beef to bean swap or a bean and mushroom swap, mushrooms have great umami flavor and meaty. And James Beard has done some great work, like make the burger, but make it half mushrooms, half ground beef. So you can still have that full feel of portion, but dramatically reduce your intake, which saves your grocery budget and has health benefits. So amount is the first, and some guiding principles around that, like, a Mediterranean style diet where red meat at most a couple times a month. That's a really nice blueprint. But you might, as practitioners, have someone where you're just starting with a meatless Monday because of where they are. So, and then beyond that, knowing where it comes from and how it's sourced. Right. I live in Idaho around ranchers. Many of them can't afford fancy certifications, but I talk to them at the farmer's market. I drive by their land. I see what's happening with the cattle. If you're still driving, there are many places in Idaho still stacked with hay bales. And I'm sort of the theory, aren't we in a transparent food system now?
Yeah.
Like, we have to hide behind that. That's a red flag. So, those are some specific things you can do. And I also just wanted to add, thank you for sharing the Food and Planet website. We have 4 free modules. Our passion is open access continuing education for health professionals. For continuing ed. So they're CPE approved. There's 4 modules. You can go in for different dimensions of sustainability and do a 30-minute supercharged learning session that might help you on your journey.
I love that. Thinking about, you blink and it's another 5 years and you got to get those CEUs done. So that's super helpful. I'll be calling. I'll be like, oh God, I got to do. So we talk about meat there, but where I think things get really confusing is, are things like eggs and now fish. And you and I have had the privilege, one of our fun experiences was going to Norway to learn about farm salmon, and also realizing that farm fish was not farmed isn't a term that is equal anywhere around the world. It's very specific to the particular farming practices and the location. How does someone, when we look at this whole big protein space and think about that, there are just a lot of people that are not going to move to plant monogamous, where they're not taking in animal products. So outside of beef, what do you think are some of the things that we should be prioritizing from the other types of animal protein?
That's such a great question. And I love, Ash, how you widen the lens back to protein,
Mm-hmm.
because that's really, of all the macronutrients that do tend to have the biggest impact on your carbon footprint or your resource footprint, because we don't want to be carbon myopic either. It's water, it's soil, it's biodiversity. Like, that's the broader sustainability. So that protein lens is great. And the first thing is diversifying proteins.
Mm.
And then maybe shifting so you have more plant proteins to animal as a ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And then within that, to your point, we really kind of see beef and red meat as the lion's share of biggest impact. And that has to do with the inefficiency of conversion of the food and the resources to make edible protein. But beyond that, eggs, some of the most eco-friendly types. Now, again, there's humane issues and sourcing issues. So if you can, I love the backyard movement or the CSA movement, where you can just have a closer eye on the sourcing. But those are very ecologically friendly protein. And then within seafood, there's a whole kingdom. In fact, we're working on a big project right now at Food and Planet to elevate seaweeds and bivalves, shellfish, mussels, clams, oysters. These we're really seeing help regenerate coastal communities, diversifying income for small fishermen, fisherwomen, communities. Indigenous, there's a lot of indigenous tribe work happening to create brands and companies that really give them not only food sovereignty, but economic security and resilience. And that's happening West Coast, East Coast. So we're at Food and Planet doing a 1-year project with Builders Initiative, looking at how do we elevate these foods in the consciousness of health practitioners, consumers, and sort of move them along on that journey to think of kale versus iceberg lettuce.
Right.
Prior to all the great work that everyone did on kale, the number one purchaser of kale, I always found this stat so interesting, was Pizza Hut. And they used it as a garnish.
As a garnish.
On the salad bar.
That's
not
right.
In a salad. We envision, maybe 5 years from now, Ash, we'll be talking about bivalves and seaweeds and these beautiful restorative ocean foods as a protein source, to your point.
Yeah, I love the seaweeds. It's interesting on that part. I've always been, I never thought about them from a regenerative standpoint, the bivalves. I was more concerned with them about their toxic their burden, because if they were not in a cleaned up area, I was thinking about that. So that's really interesting to be thinking about, as they regenerate an area, are they going to be cleaner, than because that has been something that's been on my mind. So
we're actually doing
a
lit review on that.
Good.
We will be publishing a paper at the same time to answer that very question. I think it's an excellent question.
Yeah.
It has not been addressed globally, and we're in the process of pulling together that research team with people from Stanford and Oxford. There's great things happening to look at that. And then also, I think this is where technology can come in, of testing, right? Like, is it, as we've learned from our trips together on press tours, the water in which things are grown is going to impact, right? Are there microplastics? Are there heavy metals? How are they testing? Are there barriers, like you've got your reef that you're using to purify, and then the food production reef? So there's a lot of innovation happening in that space, which is really exciting. I think the whole category is evolving.
Yeah. I'm excited about it. And then it's one of those things where, like, in real time, noting what has happened to an area, that part, could be important. I thought we could close talking about one of my absolute favorite food groups. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, number one, please go to foodandplanet.org, connect with Kate, follow her on social media, et cetera. She's just a wealth of resources. And as I said, as she's been mentioning, this research is ongoing, so there might be things to plug into your community, or to have as resources to answer some of these questions. So I had a funny experience going through the airport the other day. They pulled me over. I don't know if you've ever been through 2 pat downs, one outside and then one privately. And I was like, so what's going on? I had all these props, this food in my bag, and I knew, I was like, they've all been closed, nothing's open. But the cacao was setting off the alarm, but none of the chocolate was, because I had all this stuff, to take for a segment. And what came down, I ended up, of course, using it as a teachable moment to share with them that that raw cacao, when farmed properly, and so I knew the brand, and I'd been to where they get their cacao from, is actually very high in trace minerals. And he said, well, it's so high, it's registering as explosive, like no joke. So they confiscated, I almost missed my flight, like they confiscated the cacao because of the mineral content there. And it's a company that's farming regeneratively. And I was like, well, you'll notice that, the Dove chocolate over here and this other, milk chocolate, that didn't set off any alarm bells. And to me, I was like so happy, and they were all laughing, and I was like, I mean, if you guys just wanted some cacao, I could have, given it to you, whatever. So we were laughing about that. But in all that,
best story ever, by the way.
And for me, it's like walking with cacao. And I was sitting there, and they were like, well, you're actually registering. I'm like, probably because I got cacao on me, or, whatever at this point. But I was going through that, and I'm like, isn't that the truth, that one of the things that we're not seeing is that the soil quality, and we started off this conversation this way, but I'd love for you to share anything that the research has indicated or that you're working towards. You mentioned this term regenerative, but why is it so critical that we get, it's not even a why, but we need to get more nutrients back into our soil, right? And from a sustainability standpoint, what are the things that tend to deplete the soil that we can be looking for, that maybe flag us to, this isn't going to be a better choice because it's likely that the products coming off of this soil are going to be less good for us. So I'm, of course, talking about things like organic and regenerative, or the opposite, in terms of where things are sprayed. But what have you guys seen, and what are you advising in terms of planet-friendly choices that are also going to be better for someone?
Oh my God. I'm so obsessed with that story.
It's so great. Yeah, Columbus Airport. Yeah, exactly. Columbus Airport.
True. It's so, talk about a proof point that's really demonstrative of how we treat the soil really shapes what we harvest from it, the gifts that we will receive back. And that, of course, has to do with the microbiome of the soil, which all of your practitioners understand the implications in humans. We're just starting to really see those benefits and, frankly, measure these things. Regen Ag as a science to measure nutrient differences is very new relatively. Another really strong visual, if it's helpful, that understanding ag uses, just for your audience. I was looking at side-by-side pictures of the Dust Bowl from the 20s, and then modern dust storms, which is topsoil dirt just take from any news, or, drive around ag states. The soil color is completely different. The Dust Bowl soil is chocolate rich, dark brown. It had all of that nutrition in it. And now, to your point, I think you, at the very top of this broadcast, you had said, like, the dirt looks different.
Yes.
It looks different in a Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
So regenerative ag enriches that soil. Soil is that key to fertility, abundance, and cycles. And in terms of other just broad things to be keeping in mind, the UN has warned we have fewer than 50 growing cycles left with our current practices, because we're losing so much in waterways through dust storms because of things like not anchoring with cover crops. We're not optimizing water retention. That's the benefit of Regen Ag. And just in January, University of Washington published research looking at wheat grown regeneratively had 50% higher levels of copper, calcium. Regenerative crops had more vitamin E, more niacin, like more selenium. So the uptake of the minerals from the soil is enhanced, which means bite for bite, that food is providing more bang for your buck, more nutrition. more value, as is your cacao that's setting off TSA, right?
My explosive cacao. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, so to me, one of the false binaries is it must be plants,
Right.
and plants are always better than animals. To me, the true is like, yes, we want a lot of plants, but if you're ready to go a layer deeper, go towards supporting growers, farmers who are doing more regenerative.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
third-party certifications, like you said, knowing your grower, what are they participating in, how are they measuring it? Because unfortunately, this is where the sweet spot is in the marketplace. And
Mhm.
so everyone's trying to cozy up, and marketing claims are way ahead of
Mhm.
substance. So look
Yeah.
for substance.
Yeah, I love that because it's also the it's going to be our way to combat the explosion of supplement recommendations, because the argument for supplements, the silly argument in my opinion, is always like, well, the soil doesn't have enough. You're like, you're right, so we should correct that problem, not go out there and create a lot of supplements from ingredients that there's a lot of waste. And and I'm a huge proponent of supplements in my practice. It's more, I just
Right.
there are reasons to address things, but there are things that we can be doing. I think the other part of that you brought up so smartly is that animals that eat properly, so animals that eat the grass, get the bugs, get all of that stuff, when they're eating better quality plants just like us, they're getting more nutrient dense. And so it is, it's that cycle. Oh my gosh.
It is. In fact, I know there are ranchers now doing regenerative grazing with natural plants in the system that act as natural dewormers.
Yeah.
So their vet bill, it's not even just we're not, doing antibiotics and hormones. It's like we are saving that money
Yeah.
because the system is healthy
Yes.
and resilient. And in a real system, we have plants and animals
Yep.
in the right ratio. That was,
Hmm.
again, decoupled after World War II. We put all the animals over here and grew plants over here.
Yeah.
We obviously need, in a holistic system, the manure, the nutrient cycling, the foraging, which is good for the plants. So,
Hmm.
running livestock through walnut orchards,
Hmm.
vineyards, like this is what's happening on the front lines of
Right.
regenerative ag. And it's so beautiful and so exciting to see like the symphony of nature coming together.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think for practitioners, keep watching the science as it emerges. But many of our guiding principles of how to eat well and source good food still apply in
Hmm.
sustainability,
Hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
think that's another it can feel very confusing. And so again, focus on a few key things to get educated on, make it simple, actionable messages that your audience responds to. That would go a huge direction. And the last thing I would just point out with meat, there was a meta-analysis done by the Eat Lancet called Diets for a Better Future, where they looked at the G20 and current consumption patterns, like business as usual versus the Eat Lancet diet. And one of the great insights that was overlooked in the media is that just following US dietary guidelines would cut our beef consumption in
Right.
half.
Right. Right.
So if you're not ready to go down, like a common area is most people are eating twice as
Way
much
too much.
protein as our own
Yes.
guidelines recommend. And getting there as a first step would be halfway to our goal.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, there are some interesting things I would love to see, and it would be it's so hard with the keto and the paleo overlap in, with a lot of local restaurants and things like that. But I would love to see places that are serving portion sizes beyond that be held accountable, like where it's their cost, that there actually is a cost, or there's something there. I don't, that's the non-capitalist side of me, but I think we have to find some of those interventions. And of course, in other countries where naturally the portion sizes are more aligned with dietary recommendations, you don't see that explosive division, within that. So we had a couple of people just saying how great you are, which I will echo 1,000%. And Roxana, absolutely, you'll have to catch the replay on this part. I just wanted to say, of course, it happens to tie in that it's Earth Day on Friday. There are amazing resources that you could share with your patients and your community this week. But there's also a way to be thinking about how do you consistently fold these messages in, so we'll come up on, in June with Father's Day, and we talk a lot of times about how grilling meat and the carcinogens that are there, but like grilling less often, better, and grilling less meat less often, better. So thinking ahead, it's a great idea to think about each month, how can you integrate planet-friendly recommendations in so that people start to think about them as better nutrition overall. So I always say better nutrition, it's got to be better for you, but it's also got to be better for the planet. Otherwise, we're not moving this forward, from a health standpoint. And Kate, just so excited for the work that you're doing, which I know this is, we got to catch up earlier this year, and it's just like, it's all coming together, and it's just so needed. So thank you. As a practitioner, you're really leading the way in this. This is exciting. Yeah.
We're all doing our part because you and your community, you guys are the translators, right? Like everyone is needed in this moment and in this movement, and we're all playing essential roles. So it's an honor to be here with you and your community. I'm just such a fan of what you're doing and what you're building. And I am available. Find me on Food and Planet, join our mailing list.
Great.
Please access our free CPE courses for supercharged learning on different aspects of sustainability. And our scoping review is a free download that'll really get you on your way of where to focus.
Ah, I love it. Love it, love it, love it. Great stuff from an awesome practitioner. All right, my dear. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to drop them in here. We'll make sure that Kate gets them. Otherwise, we can connect you directly to her. So that'd be great. Okay, take care. Thank you. Bye, everybody.